Okay, so here in chapter one, this is kind of our introductory video to, to really the essence of like what is economics. So let's start with that. Now, we'll have these chapter outlines here for each chapter, but you can kind of rest assured if I don't cover it within the chapter outline, then it's not going to be important for the exam. So for instance, here, just generally speaking, that generally speaking, I'm not going to count. I'll let you make your own career choices. You don't need me to use this class to push economics as a career. Obviously, if it interests you enough as a career, we can talk about it one-on-one, but we're going to focus on these first four topics. The appendix I'm not going to cover formally, but if you don't remember very much from high school about graphs and formulas, you'll want to look at those slides about graphs and formulas as well as read the textbook appendix, but I will not be covering that in this lecture. Okay, so this is given as an example of like when we talk about, without even getting into what is economics, let's start to look at some of the questions that it might be able to answer. And one of those questions it might be able to answer is why we produce things where we do. Or in the case of the iPhone, why is it designed in the US but assembled in China? Right? If this is just an issue of keeping the cost as low as possible, why wasn't it all done in China? Or if this is a point of like having high quality, why wouldn't it all be done in the US? I don't know. Like, well, I mean, I do know, but economics should be able to provide some answer to this about why it is the case that for most goods and services that you and I all buy on a daily basis, that most of them are made overseas. We hear about it a lot during an election time because then it's usually politicians complaining about it and saying we should make more stuff here. Yeah, one of the early things we're going to learn in this class is that it's generally a bad idea, regardless of your political party. It's generally a bad idea to start to try to dictate where things should be produced. I'm not all for having pride in our country and whatnot, but it's not that companies hate the U.S. and that's why they make stuff overseas, nor do companies that make things in the U.S., although they may say that they're doing it for patriotic reasons, it's usually not the case either. It's economics that's dictating it, and more specifically, the cost structure versus other options. So when we finally get to what is economics, that the way that I would define it here would be that we would say that, sorry, I'm just trying to get this available here. That we would say that, sorry, I'm just trying to, there we go. We would say that economics is the science of scarcity. And when we say that it's a science of scarcity, what we mean by that, I'm going to try to adjust my pen here so it's not so weird looking. Let's make it this. Let's make it a pencil. I guess and we'll do a black pencil. There we go. I'm focused. Sorry. Let's do this one. Here, I'm focusing on the fact that it's a science, and I'm focusing on the fact that it's scarcity. Now, what does that mean? So for scarcity here, what we're saying is that we have unlimited wants and needs, but we have limited resources. So unlimited wants and needs, unlimited wants and needs, but limited resources. Sorry, it won't let me write the rest of it. And that economics is how we make those scarcity decisions. And that we make these scarcity decisions in a, you could say in a scientific fashion, but you could also just say an organized and rational fashion. That when we say that there's a science to it, we just mean that there's a process that it can be reliably determined how decisions are being made. And that economists generally, most of the time, are going to focus on their existing economic model, which, of course, as in the case of any model, the whole point is that these models are simplified, meaning that they have assumptions present, and that these assumptions are just trying to capture reality the best they can. They're not realistic, but they are simplified versions of that reality. So economics then comes down to how we make scarcity decisions. How we make decisions when we are faced with the fact that we can't have everything, either because we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time. I can just even tell you personally that, I'm 47 years old, and I can remember from how I was 30 years ago at 17. I had tons of time, but I didn't have a lot of money. I've got more money now than I did when I was 17, but I have a lot less time. But I still face these constraints, right, of like, what am I going to prioritize, in terms of my financial budget, but also in terms of my time budget. So yeah, you could look at some of these questions here. This is kind of a dumb slide if you ask me, because there's no real such thing as a typical economic question. There's tons and tons and tons of questions that can all be answered to some extent. That economics has some sort of answer. Whether you believe in that answer or not is a different thing. But for most of you in this class who's required to take this, essentially, probably the first one is the most important one. How are prices determined? So for me, for instance, I really distrust people. I really do. I generally don't deal with businesses thinking that they have me in their best interest. I don't think any of you should either. But I also don't like this kind of conversation where we, certainly in political circles, where people say that housing prices, for instance, a common one here in Hawaii would be that housing prices are too high or that wages are too low. Now, before you think, wow, Scheiding, you're a real piece of work, you really don't care about humanity, you're saying house prices aren't high. I'm not saying that they're high or low. That's the whole thing. The price is what it is. It's not, as we're going to learn here later in this chapter, that's a subjective judgment to say that it's high or that it's low. So you would have to if you were to say something like it's too high or too low, you'd have to say, which is a completely reasonable belief, you'd have to say that people have a right to their own house, and that people who, for instance, work have a right to a house, and that given the prices of houses, that these houses are unobtainable. So because people aren't able to achieve their right to owning a home, then the price must be too high. Again, a completely reasonable belief, but it is a belief, not a statement of fact. I, as an economist, try to not deal with beliefs. I tend to focus on the what is. And although we're not going to get to it until chapter 3, let's just talk about what this means here. Essentially, right, if we look at a house here in Hawaii, right, and sorry, I see, it's causing a problem. Okay, I'm just going to draw my picture over here. And you may have seen this picture before if you've had high school economics. But if I'm talking about the housing market, economists would generally say, okay, we've got a demand curve, we've got a supply curve, and we're going to talk about this all in chapter 3. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense. We got some sense of a graph that describes people wanting to buy houses. We have a graph, we have a function that describes how people are willing to supply houses. And the two meet at a point where we get the price. So for me, looking at it as an economist, the kind of economist that I am, I just look at the price and I say, the price is what it is. And either at that price I am willing to buy the house or I am not. What would it mean to say that it's too high? It is what it is. Everything else beyond that is a judgment by me, Scheiding. I'm not running for office. So I guess all I could say is that the house is affordable, I guess, right? That it meets my budget criteria, whatever the price is, and that I can afford it. But that'd be about it. Trust me, my friends think I'm annoying when I say it like that, but this is a good approach, though, of what a typical economy, not the ones that you see on TV. The ones you see, the economists you see on TV are paid to tell you their opinions about too high or too low. And that's not my case. And you may really dislike me and this class because I don't take points of view like the house price is too high. Well, you know what? You are certainly entitled to that belief, and then use the things you learn in this class to share your belief that you think that it's too high or too low. Absolutely. More power to you, and I'll even help you with the analysis. But that's what I focus on, me, Scheiding. I focus on the analysis, and I focus on the statement of this. So in some sense, I am more of the scientist part of economics more than the social scientist part of economics. So keep that in mind here. And then we've got these other questions here of like price controls, right? We see price controls with things like the minimum wage, which again is a bit problematic because generally speaking, as we'll see with the third question, why does the government control the prices of some goods and services? The problem there is, how did you determine what the price should be? I'm not really sure. If we look at, here's another case where maybe you'll think, wow, Scheiding, you're a real piece of work. I'm not entirely sure why the minimum wage is set at what it's at. For instance, when I moved here to Hawaii originally, the minimum wage here was $10.10. Why do I remember that? Well, because it was a really conveniently easy number to remember, 10.10. Now the minimum wage in Hawaii is, I think, $15 an hour. But here's my question. This is the only thing I'm critiquing here, is why is it 15? It strikes me, what does the math tell us here? That if you worked 15 hours a week, and you worked all the day, you never took a single day off, you would earn $31,200, which in Hawaii would be really, really bad. Wouldn't be enough to live on. I mean, seriously, like, more, if you were just yourself and you were living in your car maybe, or you had like a sugar mama or sugar daddy, I don't know, but for $31,200 you'd have a really tough life. So then I guess here's my question then. What's the point of having the minimum wage? Right? Because people that say we should have a minimum wage say it's impossible to live on wages, so we need to make it this minimum wage. I would argue that you just picked a nice round number like 15. because it's an easy, convenient number. And maybe those individuals should do more of what we have, what are called the living wage campaigns. But here's the problem, right, with this third question, is that it's just difficult. This isn't a political thing, but it's difficult for the government to find the right price. One of the things we're going to learn throughout this entire course is that generally speaking, this isn't markets work. And what I mean by that is that the market system, which we can describe with kind of this graph over here. Markets, generally speaking, are really good at finding a quantity of how much should be produced and bought, and generally good at finding a price. Problem generally with the government is that someone's trying to get elected, someone doesn't know all the information that they need to. There's just more problems that emerge with something like that. Okay, so I guess that leads us then to our question of like, what is a market? Well, a market is where the buyers and sellers come together. In our case here, that generally speaking, we're going to understand that with this kind of graphical space where the quantity is on the x-axis, the price of the product is on the y-axis, and in chapter 3, we're going to understand the people who want to buy stuff, which is going to be our demand side, and we're going to understand people who want to sell stuff, which is our supply side. And then we're going to focus on that point where they meet to find out the total amount that should be produced and the price of those products that they should be. And this setting would be where they are coming together and they are trading. Generally speaking, as I said, this is the model. The three ideas here is that we're generally going to presume that the buyers and the sellers are both rational. What that means is that they act consistently. It would also mean, as according to the second point, that they respond to economic incentives or disincentives. Right, an incentive would be basically the way that we encourage people to do things. For example, right now, the big encouragement that's occurring, I say this because I was looking for, so I have an old car. I have a really old car. I have a 2004 Toyota. That's a piece of junk. So I went to Servco to look for a car, and if I want to buy a truck, right, the typical Hawaii taco, right, so my wife wants to get a big truck. Well, it uses a lot of gas, obviously. My wife just wants to sit high. I don't care either way, one way or the other. But I mean, it's pretty costly. However, Toyota also sells an electric car. I don't know, it's got something like BZ something, whatever. But the government would give me a bunch of money, something like $7,500 to buy the electric car. Well, I guess that would be a reason to buy it, right? And it should encourage someone like myself, maybe, who wouldn't normally buy that kind of car, to buy that kind of car. I don't know. I don't think I want to. But, right, the idea should be is that, I mean, maybe the incentive's not enough, I guess you could say, right? If the thing was you could have a free car or a car for half the price if it was electric, maybe I would do it. It's not that I'm not, if I choose not to buy the electric car, it's not that I'm not responding to the incentive. I guess I would just be saying that the incentive is not enough for me to do it. And then what we say with the third bullet point, and we're going to look at each of these in their own way, but that optimal decisions are made at the margin. And basically what that means is that we're going to see that optimal decisions are made when the person decides each and every time, do I do this or do I buy this one more time? And then they proceed from there. So when we look at the first one of are people rational? What we can see here is that, again, that people are acting consistently, that they are using all available information, and that they're acting, I'm not sure why they didn't put it here, but that they're acting in a consistent way, meaning a predictable way. And that we as consumers and firms are then weighing those benefits and the cost of each action. Each time you do something, you basically would say to yourself, is it wise to continue doing this? What are the, and related to the third point, what are the benefits to doing it versus what are the costs to doing it one more time? And then again, for the incentives, that we can encourage people to do things, or we can discourage people from doing things. That's kind of, it's kind of interesting. So if you're a felon, you're required to submit a DNA sample. And then when there's a new crime committed, they compare DNA to the DNA they already have, which would mean that repeat offenders are more likely to get caught. Look at, I guess that's pretty interesting, right? That because the person doing it is likely to do it again and then would be likely to get caught, then the people just decide, okay, I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm not going to keep doing crime. Possibly, at least this narrative would seem to respond to that. When we look at this electric car thing, only because I was interested in it because I was looking at it, I'm not alone. So for new car buyers aren't buying the electric cars despite the incentives existing. It's not, again, it's not refuting what is being said here. Rather, it's just that the incentive is not enough. On the other hand, I do have solar panels in my house. And the reason why I had solar panels in my house is because you get a tax break, and it makes the cost of the solar panels essentially half the price, which is enough of an incentive for me to buy it. Right? So you could just say the incentive amount is not enough. Then we've got this kind of interesting thing here. This is kind of one of the current debates we have right now, which is this whole idea that we wanted to give people a incentive to, especially for college graduates, to take on government jobs or public jobs, because then what would happen is that their student loans would be forgiven after a period of time. Well, the issue here would be is that if we make college cheaper by, in essence, allowing people to borrow the money and then forgiving the loans, or making it just cheaper in general, what it could do is it could lead to increases in tuition. And what we're seeing here is that student loan values are going up, but if people know that they don't have to pay it back, they might be more willing to go to college or go to a more expensive college, thus increasing the cost. So sometimes incentives don't act the way that you want them to, right? In essence, what we could be saying here is that too many people are going to college, or that colleges are not keeping their tuition affordable because people know that they aren't paying for it. Now this one's incredibly important. This third one was that optimal decisions are made on the margin. And specifically what we're looking at here is that we're looking at marginal benefits and we're looking at marginal costs. And when you see the word marginal, I want you to think of the word additional. So what we're saying is that what's the additional cost to doing something? What's the additional benefit to doing something? We do this all the time, right? We think about what would be the value of an extra hour of sleep. Or we look at people who are making bad decisions and we critique them on the basis of the fact that they're not making this kind of what is called marginal analysis, where they compare these. I try to live a good life. I do. 47 years of life has taught me many, many things. I do sleep 8 hours a night. I am really cranky. My kids and wife know it. I'm really cranky, almost intolerable person if I don't sleep 8 hours a night. I am the way I am. And I know that sometimes I'm not going to get 8 hours. So I really have to compare what the benefits and costs are. You'll notice that even in this class, as I prepare the materials, you might even think, wow, Shading, you're really slow in doing these things. Well, I've only got so many hours of the day to do it. And I'm not like one of these guys that's going to, pull an all-nighter and get the whole class loaded all in one day. Because I need my 8 hours. Otherwise, this lecture would be coming out with me being like, I hate you all. Why are you taking this online class? Just take the in-person class. Why are you making me make these lectures? Just look on YouTube. Khan Academy will solve it all. Right? And I'd say, lecture done. Really, I know what my benefits and costs are. The benefit is I know that I'm delivering a high-quality course, right? And I can deliver that high-quality course. It's just that the cost is, in this case, it's going to take a little bit more time, a few extra days to do it, right? But I think that the trade-off is worth it. So I'm willing to do it. And I make that benefit cost comparison by just even thinking about my day, right? Like today, when I'm making lectures, I'm basically going off email, turned off my phone, I'm making lectures, right? That's the cost. The benefit is that I know I'll be able to make these lectures in an uninterrupted fashion. Okay. Now, every society has trade-offs in some way. And what these trade-offs mean is that we have to think about how we're going to use, how we're going to make our scarcity decisions. Because remember, under scarcity, we have limited resources to meet unlimited wants and needs. And the questions that are then raised from this, what is going to be produced? How is it going to be produced? Who is it going to be produced for? Sorry. I'm getting used to this pen here. What is going to be produced? How is it going to be produced? Who is it going to be produced for? And so in a world of scarcity, all three of these questions have to be asked. We face trade-offs. What are we going to decide to do? I'll tell you a trade-off. And again, I'm not trying to be political when I say this. It's just also I'm not a robot. So here's something that makes me grumpy about the world when I think of these trade-offs. Among industrialized countries, meaning big developed countries, the United States ranks, I think we're the top country in the Western world for maternal death during delivery, meaning mothers dying while they're giving birth. I mean, that's more than like Haiti, which even has a really underdeveloped healthcare system. Maternal death is in the United States is among the highest. I don't know. I mean, I just don't feel good. I mean, I'm obviously not a woman, but I don't feel good about that healthcare outcome, given the quality of the healthcare system in the United States and just how much we've spent on the system. 1/7 of our total production um, resources is devoted to healthcare, and yet the outcome of incredibly high maternal deaths, I just don't think they are aligned with each other. So the question would then be, what is the trade-off? Why is this the case? Well, I mean, I'm not a healthcare researcher, but the one thing I have seen is that one of the reasons why is because hospitals are not don't have as many delivery rooms as they used to. So hospitals are generally owned by corporations, and these corporations don't want to have a delivery room in every one of their facilities. So on the mainland, you might have 100 miles to drive to deliver your child. Right? As a person who, with 3 kids, I can tell you every drive with my wife who's, about to pop out a child is a pretty painful drive, and it's just like a few miles. I can't imagine driving 100 miles. So let's just take a random look here. Let's just do this here. I'm going to go here into Google News, and I'm going to just type in child delivered on road. June 19th. Well, some of these are kind of bad here, but June 26th, baby delivered by firefighters in dramatic car birth. Let's again avoid the other ones. Here we go. Overland Park couple's newborn baby delivered on side of road near Interstate 435. Some of these, again, are a bit old. But one of the reasons here is that people aren't even able to drive to the hospital in that time to do this. Let's just look at this here. So this is just 2 days ago. Right, and you could read these articles here. Again, I'm no expert on this, so I'm just talking about this as a person who just tries to be informed about the world. Right, again, we could critique it here, right? So we could just say, oh, maybe we're just measuring things badly, which very well might be an argument. There's a lot of pictures of bellies. I'm not trying to be on a high horse here. Everything has a trade-off. I'm not. If I said that the trade-off instead was that, wasn't that I was trying to imply there that maybe these private corporations that own the hospitals are trying to make more money off of it, and they don't really care if people are dying as much. If instead the trade-off was something different, instead of enhanced profits, it was, I don't know, something else, right? That more kids were getting vaccinations, so we couldn't invest as much in maternity care. Then the argument would be different. I'm just not happy with that trade-off. But I guess I can say this. A trade-off does have to exist. What I'm saying to you is that I'm not happy with what, as a person, personally, I'm not happy with the trade-off that we did. Now, we have this in our households all the time, right? I'd actually be completely fine driving my junky car. Because for me, I'm more concerned about, in my case, I don't want to have a lot of debt. So for me, I'd rather not borrow money to just buy a car. My wife seems to be okay with that. It's a difference of opinion. I'm not sure I'm right. I'm not sure she's right. Right? This is what couples, right, families talk about, is what the trade-offs are. If we get this, then it's going to mean less of something else. Now, from a countrywide perspective, let's think about how these questions are answered. What is produced? How is it produced? Who is it produced for? At least in the United States, most these questions, these three questions, are all answered by the market. The market determines what's produced or not. The market determines who gets the goods that are produced. The market determines how we will produce them. The government, for the most part, is not going to get involved in determining these things, at least in the United States. In other countries, let's think of an incredibly, for instance, in China, for instance, many of these questions, not all the questions, but many of the questions, the government is at least influencing the answers. In an extreme situation like North Korea, the government is determining the answers to these questions. And what this leads us to, when we think about this trade-off, is the opportunity cost. And this is we're not going to do a lot of definitions where I want you to know something like word for word for word, but this is actually a pretty important definition. I gotta find where my mouse is here. Here it is. This is a pretty important definition. So the opportunity cost is the highest valued alternative that I give up to do something. So for me right now, making this lecture, I like to be focused. I like it to be the only thing. My phone is turned upside down. My computer is on Do Not Disturb. My door is closed. I'm not answering it. So what's the thing that I'm giving up? Well, I'm giving up answering emails, doing something else. But the fact that I'm making this lecture means it's the most highly valued thing I'm doing right now. If instead I did all that and I was just sleeping in my office, unless I'm sick or I don't know, something else, we wouldn't argue that sleeping at this hour would be the most highly valued thing I should be doing, that there are other activities that I should be doing instead with my workday. One always needs to think about what their opportunity cost is for doing something. It's this recognition again of the fact that because I'm choosing to do something, I can't do something else. What is the value of that thing that I can't do? And so we can see these kinds of, examples here where we'd have to think about, like, again, how we decide to make certain products and whatnot. So in terms of then the what will be produced, we're determining this based on the opportunity cost. The how it will be produced is essentially determined by costs of production. And who will receive the goods? Well, it's the people who have enough money to buy it. Most of the time, in most countries, it's generally a mix of both of these things. We have some things where the government does decide how the resources are going to be allocated, and some things where we let the market determine things. As an example, right now we are engaged in a debate in Hawaii about whether children under the age of 5 should be provided with preschool, pre-kindergarten care. Right now in Hawaii, for the most part, if you want your child to receive education before the age of 5, you have to pay for it yourself, private pay. Once your child reaches age 5, then the government will pay for it, right? Our DOE schools. Then we do have the UH system, but if you decided to go to the community colleges, we have something called Hawaii Promise, which would mean that you could go to community college at least for paying no more than your expected family contribution. Well, the debate right now is about should the government get more involved in covering kids that are under the age of 5 paying for their preschool. And on the other side of the debate is, should the government get more involved in paying for community college, like just making it completely free? Well, that's our debate, right? About should the government have this role or not, or should we just leave it to the market? And in essence, too, what we have to think about is that if the government does decide to pay for that that education, then it might have less to spend on other things. What would those other things be? Well, for instance, again, I'm really not trying to be political, but I am not a robot either. But the other thing that the government has recently decided to spend money on, which was a good thing, in my opinion. Something good that the government has decided to spend money on was providing for dental care for those on Medicaid. So Medicaid is the health care for the poor. And in the past, then, a poor person would have their health expenses covered by, if you were a poor person, you had your health care expenses covered by the state government and by the federal government. But the problem was that dental procedures were not covered. And the one thing we've learned over time is that preventative dental care is pretty cheap. So if we pay for kids to get their cleanings and whatnot, then it's less likely they're going to need expensive dental procedures when they're older. And so it was just a few years, I think 3 years ago, that the government decided to start paying for dental coverage through Medicaid. Again, a good thing, but it does mean now something less. I don't know, right? It might mean then less preschool classrooms. I don't know what it is. We could make that argument that sacrifice is not worth it. But it's an argument to be made, at least. So again, we just have more trade-offs that we face. Again, this is what excites some people about government, is that we can talk about these things and think about, what are our priorities? What are the things that are worth it to us or not? In most economies, ours included, the United States, we have mixed economies where we have some things that reflect government intervention, like Social Security, like the minimum wage, like, as I was saying, schooling. But then we also have a lot of things that have a market economy base, where it's just, the government provides what is needed. We really only saw this kind of expansion of the government in the economy, starting especially during the Great Depression, which gives us kind of the mixed economy that we have today. So what we have to look at as well is, why is that the case? Why is it that we rely on markets more than the government to determine things? Well, one of the beauties of the market is that they are incredibly efficient. And what that means specifically is that markets are really good at producing things at the lowest possible cost. They're not as good about making sure that we have equity. So they're bad at equity, meaning that everyone gets a chance at things. But they are really good at being efficient, producing things at the lowest possible cost. This productive efficiency, producing the most amount of stuff at the lowest possible cost, we achieve this with the market, and then we decide the specific things that should be produced by looking at the allocative efficiency. In essence, ensuring that consumers are reaching their marginal benefits and marginal costs for each of the things that are being produced. And the reason why these markets are generally efficient is because there's competition. competition, in essence, is a good thing. If I was a person living on a budget and I needed groceries, I'm probably not going to go to Whole Foods. Probably not going to go to Foodland. So where would I go? Right? I don't know. I guess I would go to Don Quixote. Maybe I would go to Times. Maybe I'd go to Walmart. Maybe I'd go to Costco. Maybe I'd go to Sam's Club. See all these options, right? And they're all trying to compete for me, the low income, income constrained consumer who just needs to buy their groceries. Okay, right? So that competition is good because it's going to keep the prices low. Now, let's say I'm really rich. I'm not. But let's say I am. Well, where would I go? I don't know. Probably go to Foodland. Probably go to Safeway. Go to Whole Foods. I don't know. Where else do rich people go? I don't know. I'm not rich, so I don't know where they go. I don't know. Maybe I'd buy food on like Amazon and have it shipped to me. But the idea is that there's even some levels of competition there. None of these are bad things. Competition isn't a bad word. It just ensures that the services that are delivered are of the highest quality, and that it reflects the prices that are paid for those products. Now, there are times, however, where the market isn't good at providing something. And this generally comes about in situations, especially with things like pollution, where the individuals are paying a different cost than the rest of society. So let's say, for instance, I am... Oh, well, we have an example here. So if I need a new set of tires, I have to pay a fee, essentially, to the government to dispose of these tires properly. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe I would just chuck them out my car window, right? And then the tire would cause all this pollution. The cost to me would be minimal, right? To nothing, because I've driven away from the tire that I threw on the side of the road. But the community where that tire is sitting now has to suffer from a tire sitting there, collecting bugs and, causing diseases. We also see it, though, with like other things where the government might interfere. We don't have a private police force. We don't have a private fire department. We don't have a private military. These things we pay for with the government, generally speaking, because if we ask people to pay for the fire protection, most people wouldn't pay for it because they'd be like, dude, I've never had a fire. Why should I worry about it? Right? And then only rich people would be able to afford it and get that protection. That doesn't seem right or fair. So we, generally speaking, have had the government intervene to produce those goods. And we'll talk about these more later in this course. So markets are good at efficiency. They're not as good about equity. Equal distribution. And so generally speaking, in the areas where we're more concerned about equitable distribution, we generally have the government involved for things like education, police protection, fire protection, the judicial system, the military. We generally let the government provide those things because then everyone gets it. And we pay for it then with taxes, so that's why taxes are then generally necessary. So again, we build these models, these economic models, with hypotheses, right? And you can kind of see here the scientific method. We use the scientific method to refine our hypotheses and then test the model to see if we're getting the results that we need. But again, we're generally going to assume about individuals is that they are rational and that that individuals and firms are trying to maximize something. That for consumers, they're trying to maximize their satisfaction, their happiness, and that for firms that they're trying to maximize their profit levels. And we can test these hypotheses. And generally speaking, what we're really looking for here are causal relationships. So remember that earlier example we looked at, the one with the DNA? We don't actually know if criminals are not repeating their offenses because of that DNA tracking. In essence, we know that there's a correlation, we'll see this word here, that the things are moving in different directions here, right? In this sense that there's a negative correlation, that to the that the variables are moving in the opposite direction, that I am increasing my capture of DNA and it's reducing the number of crimes committed. But we don't know that one is causing the other to happen. I mean, as a different example that will kind of highlight this, it turns out that ice cream consumption and drownings both move in the same direction. But is ice cream consumption causing drowning? No, it's the fact, right? It's not a causal relationship. We'd have to do more testing and collect more data, and we wouldn't have to do very much to find out that they're both occurring in summer, which would mean, at least on the mainland, that more people swim in the summer and they also consume more ice cream. But one's not causing the other. So the problem with that earlier example was that we don't know that criminals are saying, I guess I don't need to do crime anymore. They've got my DNA. I'm not sure that that's exactly the case. I need more data. So that causal relationship is really important. I mean, that's the gold standard. It's what gets you your research published, but it takes a lot of information to determine whether that causal relationship exists. And that's why it says here it's often difficult to establish whether the effect is causal. Most of the time we can talk more about there being just a correlation existing. And when we try to look at what economists are doing, and we're talking about like the analysis, as you can kind of already tell even just from this very first lecture, I'm generally speaking going to focus on positive analysis, meaning I'm going to focus on what is. These are testable statements of fact, right? If I say to you a house in Honolulu, the average house in Honolulu costs $1.3 million, well, that is either true or it is false. The price is what it is. The normative analysis would be saying what ought to be. So that would be me saying the price of housing in Honolulu is too high. It's not my job as a professor to do normative analysis. You should not care about what my beliefs are. You shouldn't care about what my politics are. I will strive as much as possible to engage in just positive analysis in this class. Economists, there are some types of economists out there that do the normative analysis, but I am not one of them, and the classroom for me is not a place where you do it. So I guess I am a little bit robotic in that sense. I do have beliefs. So I'm not going to try to hold them back too much, but you're certainly never going to be tested on them, and they're not going to be the focus of a chapter discussion. You need a different kind of economist for that. In terms of what is economics, generally speaking, I mean, we are in the social sciences division, so we are, like with these other disciplines, psychology, political science, sociology, but in other departments at other universities, you will find economics in a business division, business department. Many of you are business students and you're being required to take this class. I'm not sure. It's not saying here, the title of this slide isn't that it is a social science, that it can be, I guess we're just saying here, that it can be understood as a social science, just as it can be understood as a discipline in business as well. economists kind of have a mixed identity here. Okay, so I'm going to just skip this slide here. Economics itself, when we're thinking about these types of analysis that individuals do, we could also say here that economists, there's two kinds of economists in this world. There are those who do microeconomics and there are those who do macroeconomics. Microeconomics is the older of these two. Microeconomics is looking at how individual households and individual firms make choices. It's looking at their interaction processes in the market and how the government might get involved. This field dates back to the 1700s with like Adam Smith, and then even before that with like the physiocrats and the mercantilists and whatnot, all the way back to the Middle Ages. And some would even argue that microeconomics goes all the way back to Aristotle and the Greeks. Macroeconomics is my field of study, and it emerges largely in the 1930s with John Maynard Keynes, which, by the way, Adam Smith, the noted microeconomist, born on June 5th, the noted macroeconomist John Maynard Keynes, also born on June 5th, and me. I was also born on June 5th. So all three of us are Geminis. It is true. So macroeconomics emerges largely during the Great Depression, and then you're looking at the economy as a whole with things that you would have heard about in the news, like CPI, inflation, unemployment rate, GDP, economic growth. It's obviously a younger field, and it's also a field where it makes better news stories than microeconomics does. So here you just have some kind of examples of the kinds of questions that come about because of it. Okay, again, I just said I'm not going to talk about 1.5, so you can look at it here. Good job, I guess. Not sure why they feel it's important to do that. Okay, so, and then again, I said I'm not going to do the appendix. You can look at these slides if you want to, just to confirm for yourself that you understand some of the math involved, but because of the prerequisites for this course already involved that you should know it, I'm not going to devote time to it. Okay, so that's our lecture here for chapter 1. Okay.